Imagine lying in bed at night when the world is silent and the shadows stretch across your walls. You think you are alone, but then you feel it, a presence, heavy and watchful. The air grows colder, your heart pounds faster, and though no one is there, you sense eyes fixed on you from the darkness. Then comes the whisper, soft at first, almost tender. It promises you what your heart longs for most. Maybe love, maybe wealth, maybe power. You don't see who speaks, but you feel the pull, as if invisible hands are reaching not just for your body, but for your very soul. Now imagine those whispers turning into vows. Imagine something beyond this world asking for your devotion, your loyalty, even your hand in marriage. It sounds impossible, like a horror story, yet this very question has haunted humanity for thousands of years. Can demons marry humans? The Bible holds secrets that suggest more than most people are ready to hear. Genesis chapter 6 describes a moment when the boundaries between heaven and earth collapsed. It says, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives of all whom they chose." At first glance it looks like a small verse, easy to skip over. But those words hide one of the strangest and most terrifying chapters in human history. Who were these sons of God? Some traditions insist they were simply men, descendants of Seth, the righteous son of Adam. But the oldest stories, both Jewish and early Christian, point to something much darker. They say these were heavenly beings, angels who rebelled, who abandoned their place of purity to chase desire. And when they looked at the daughters of men, they saw beauty they craved. They stepped into human lives, not as guardians, but as suitors. These beings were not clumsy shadows. They were glorious, radiant, terrifying. To the women of that age, they must have seemed like gods. Imagine a presence tall and otherworldly, with knowledge beyond imagining, promising affection and offering mysteries. Imagine the temptation of saying yes, believing you were chosen for something greater. But what seemed like marriage was not love. It was corruption. It was invasion. The children of these unions were called Nephilim, giants, men of renown. But their fame was not holy. They were conquerors, warriors, predators. Imagine seeing men twice your height striding through the fields, their voices shaking the ground, their appetites consuming everything around them. These were not legends whispered to frighten children. They were flesh and blood, towering reminders of a covenant that should never have existed. The earth began to groan under their presence. Violence filled every city, every valley, every mountain stronghold. Humanity, once created in the image of God, began to blur, its very blood rewritten by these forbidden unions. And as the corruption spread, the promise of a Redeemer, the seed of the woman who would one day crush the serpent, came under threat. The enemy's plan was simple: destroy humanity by merging it with the fallen. If no pure line remained, then no Messiah could come. And then came the flood. God's judgment was swift and devastating. But the flood was not only punishment, it was protection. It was the only way to stop the spread of corruption, the only way to preserve a line untouched by the Nephilim. Noah is described not only as righteous, but perfect in his generations. His bloodline was clean, his family untainted by the unions that defiled the earth. Through him, humanity would survive. Through his descendants, Christ would one day be born. But the shadow of the Nephilim did not vanish entirely. When Israel later scouted the land of Canaan, the spies returned trembling, saying, "We saw the giants there, the descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Entire tribes, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzummim, carried the echo of that corruption. Their presence filled warriors with dread, their sighs reminding Israel of the days before the flood. Even Goliath, who stood before David with taunts and armor heavier than most men could lift, was part of this legacy. And Jesus himself spoke words that tie these ancient stories to our future. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Those are not casual words. They are a warning that what happened once will happen again. That the strange unions of old, the crossing of forbidden lines, the pursuit of covenant by fallen beings, would not remain locked in the past. The story is not finished, it is only paused, waiting for its next chapter to unfold. Across the world, cultures tell stories of spirits that take human lovers, of unseen husbands and wives who visit in the night, of children born with strange powers or cursed destinies. Medieval Europe whispered of incubi and succubi. Africa spoke of river spirits who claimed spouses and brought ruin to their households. Asia told tales of fox spirits who seduced men, binding them with invisible threads. Different lands, different names, yet the same pattern, beings from beyond seeking covenant with flesh. These are not harmless stories. They are scattered fragments of a truth first revealed in Genesis. They are echoes of the same strategy, repeated in new disguises, always pursuing the same goal: to bind, to corrupt, to claim. And while many dismiss them as folklore, others recognize the shadow of something far more sinister. When we follow the thread of these stories across history, the parallels become too precise to ignore. Take the incubi and succubi of medieval Europe. Villagers whispered of shadows that slipped into bedrooms at night, lying beside men and women, demanding intimacy. Some said they were tricksters, others swore they were relentless lovers who drained their victims of strength, leaving them pale and hollow by morning. Priests described confessions of people who believed they had been married to unseen partners, trapped in covenants they could not explain. And though skeptics scoffed, the details always repeated: intimacy offered, loyalty demanded, freedom stolen. Travel to West Africa and the Caribbean and you hear stories of water spirits, often described as beautiful women who rise from rivers or seas. They seduce men with promises of wealth, favor, and success. Many who encounter them claim they were chosen, marked, even wed. But soon their lives spiral. Their human relationships collapse, misfortune follows them like a curse, and the spirit returns night after night to demand what belongs only to it. Generations pass down these warnings, mothers telling daughters, fathers telling sons: do not answer when the river calls, do not look twice when the spirit smiles. In East Asia, fox spirits prowl the edges of folklore. They are said to shift into stunning women, captivating men with beauty beyond compare. Legends tell of marriages that last years, even decades, until the illusion breaks and the man realizes he has been bound to a creature not of this world. By then it is too late. His wealth is gone, his health is shattered, and his soul is tangled in threads he cannot cut. Different lands, different names, yet always the same pattern. Always the story of unions between flesh and spirit, of marriages that promise delight but deliver destruction. If these tales were isolated, we could dismiss them as cultural quirks. But when the same story appears on every continent, across centuries, echoing the same details found in Genesis, the conclusion becomes harder to ignore. And consider this: in Scripture, demons never appear satisfied with fleeting moments. They seek permanence. Jesus described them as restless, wandering dry places, searching for a home. When they find one, they do not let go easily. They return, bringing more with them, fortifying their claim. This is covenant behavior, marriage behavior. A spirit that calls a person, my house, is not seeking a passing fling. It is seeking ownership. And ownership, in the language of heaven and earth, is covenant. That is why those ancient unions were described as marriages, not encounters. The fallen ones did not simply visit women, they took them as wives. They sought to mimic God's design for covenant, but twisted it into a mockery. Where God's covenant builds life, theirs drained it. Where God's covenant preserves purity, theirs corrupted it. Where God's covenant brings blessing to generations, theirs spread curses that haunted bloodlines. Look at how Scripture describes the flood generation. Every thought of humanity's heart was only evil continually. Violence filled the earth. This was not random wickedness, it was the fruit of corrupted covenant. When the very image of humanity is altered, when marriages themselves become counterfeit, then society collapses. The flood was the only solution, the great cleansing to reset the world and preserve the promise of redemption. But as we already saw, the giants did not vanish completely. Israel's journey into Canaan brought them face to face with tribes who carried that legacy. And though God gave his people victory, the fear was palpable. Ordinary men could not stand against them. Only faith in God toppled giants, as David proved with Goliath. Again and again, the same truth was revealed. What is born of demonic covenant may seem invincible, but it crumbles before the power of the living God. Still, the fascination never left humanity. Even after the flood, even after the conquest of Canaan, people whispered about forbidden unions. And in the centuries that followed, as cultures spread across the earth, those whispers grew into myths, legends, folklore. Some framed the spirits as gods, others as monsters, others as lovers. But beneath the masks, the pattern remained unchanged. The fallen ones still desired what they had desired from the beginning: covenant with humanity, marriage with flesh. Think of how dangerous this is. Marriage is not a casual arrangement. It is a vow, a binding of two lives into one. When demons mimic marriage, they are not simply tormenting, they are rewriting destiny. They are binding souls to themselves, making it far harder for those souls to turn to God. It is not just about nightmares or failed relationships, it is about eternal allegiance. This is why their pursuit is relentless, why testimonies across the world describe spirits that will not let go once they have claimed a person as theirs. And in our time, the whispers have not stopped. They have simply taken new forms. Stories of alien abductions describe strange beings who take humans aboard ships, experimenting with reproduction, speaking of hybrid offspring. To many this sounds like science fiction, but to others it sounds hauntingly familiar. Once again, beings from beyond seeking to unite with flesh, once again the promise of something extraordinary, once again the violation of boundaries never meant to be crossed. At the same time, entertainment feeds the imagination with endless tales of supernatural romance. Movies and novels portray relationships with vampires, angels, demons, or spirits as thrilling, desirable, even noble. Millions consume these stories without realizing what they are normalizing. Seeds are planted, desires shaped, and what once seemed unthinkable becomes attractive. Just as the women of Genesis chapter 6 saw beauty and were enticed, so too does this generation find itself tempted by the idea of love with something otherworldly. The trap is disguised as fantasy, but fantasy has always been one of the enemy's sharpest tools. And as culture grows comfortable with blurred lines, the spiritual danger deepens. People dabble with rituals, spells, and occult practices, thinking they are harmless games. They invite spirits into their lives, sometimes even asking them for love. What they do not realize is that these rituals are proposals, invitations to covenant. And demons are always listening, always ready to answer with a counterfeit vow. This is why the question matters so much. Can demons marry humans? Not only did they once, but they still seek to, in ways tailored for every generation. The battlefield may look different now, but the strategy has never changed. The fallen ones long for covenant, and humanity, often unaware, continues to answer their call. In every generation the shapes of these encounters change, but the core remains the same, and when you begin to notice the details, the repetition becomes almost unsettling. In medieval Europe, people described demons slipping into their homes at night, demanding intimacy, but in the same century halfway across the world, fishermen along the West African coast whispered of water queens who rose from the waves, dazzling men with their beauty and offering them gifts. The fishermen who accepted those gifts returned wealthier, more powerful, but their families fell apart and their children sickened. In China, men told of women who seemed too perfect, who loved too fiercely, who later revealed themselves to be fox spirits feeding on their vitality. The common thread runs like a scar across history: a supernatural presence, a covenant of intimacy, and a cost that always outweighs the promise. The Bible gives us glimpses of how this works. When Jesus described unclean spirits wandering in dry places, restless, seeking rest, and returning to call a human body my house, he revealed the mindset of these beings. They crave attachment, not passing encounters. They seek ownership, permanence, covenant. That is why the ancient text does not say the sons of God seduced women or used them for a time, it says they took them as wives. The language is deliberate. What was forged was not a passing sin but a union meant to mimic the most sacred bond God created for humanity. And this distortion of covenant is the most sinister part. Marriage, in God's design, is a reflection of His love for His people, a union that produces life, stability, and blessing. When fallen beings twist it, the result is a mockery. Their unions produced not life in its fullness but giants, conquerors, destroyers. Their marriages did not bless, they cursed. And the echoes of that twisting remain in every culture's tale of spirit spouses, because once the counterfeit seed is sown, it grows like weeds through human imagination, sprouting again and again across ages and lands. The testimonies in modern times carry the same patterns. People wake in the night to feel the weight of an unseen presence pressing down on them, touching them, holding them in ways no shadow should. They dream repeatedly of weddings, ceremonies they never agreed to, and wake with rings on their fingers that vanish by morning. They feel jealous companions they cannot see, companions that ruin their human relationships, drive away potential spouses, and whisper threats whenever they try to move on. Some find themselves sick without cause, their strength drained, their joy fading, until prayer and deliverance finally reveal the root. The pattern is no different than it was thousands of years ago, only clothed in new disguises. And this persistence reveals the deeper aim. It was never only about desire. It was about inheritance. In the ancient world, marriage meant legacy, bloodline, the passing down of power. By marrying women, the fallen ones sought to corrupt not just individuals but entire generations. The Nephilim were their legacy, their attempt to override humanity with a hybrid race that bore their mark. And while the physical giants may have been swept away by the flood, the principle of corrupted inheritance still lingers. Families plagued by cycles of destruction often trace back to unholy covenants that were never broken. Spirit spouses today do not only claim the individual, they reach for children, for grandchildren, pulling entire bloodlines into their grip. This is why deliverance often feels like a family matter rather than an individual one. When a person renounces a spirit spouse and prays for freedom, it is not uncommon for their children to feel release as well, for generational chains to snap. What began with one covenant echoes through generations, and when it is finally broken, the freedom ripples outward. The legacy of destruction is cut short, replaced with the legacy God intended. The more you examine it, the more you see how consistent the enemy's tactics are. In Canaan, Israel faced not only fortified cities but tribes of giants, descendants of unions never meant to exist. The spies trembled because the people they saw were not ordinary. The land itself seemed poisoned by their presence. These giants had spread fear and idolatry across nations, establishing cultures built on corruption. And God's command to drive them out was not cruelty, it was cleansing. If left, those tribes would have infected Israel's inheritance, corrupting the people meant to carry God's promise forward. That promise, the seed of the woman, has always been the target. From Eden, God declared that the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, and the fallen ones took that as their battlefield. If humanity could be corrupted, if bloodlines could be rewritten, then the promise would fail. The marriages of Genesis chapter 6 were not accidents, they were a calculated strike against God's plan of redemption. And even though the flood preserved the line, the enemy has never stopped trying new disguises to achieve the same goal. In our own time, the methods have shifted again. Stories of alien encounters carry eerie similarities to the old legends. Beings descending from the sky, taking humans, experimenting with reproduction, speaking of hybrid offspring. To some, these are the delusions of frightened minds. To others, they are the same story retold in modern language, the same hunger for covenant wearing a mask shaped by today's imagination. Whether clothed in myth, folklore, or science fiction, the core is unchanged. Beings from beyond seeking to merge with flesh, to blur the line between human and other. At the same time, entertainment feeds the fascination. Novels and films glamorize romance with vampires, angels, demons, presenting it as thrilling and desirable. Millions consume these stories, their imaginations shaped by them, their desires bent subtly toward what was once unthinkable. This is how temptation has always worked, dressed in beauty, presented as harmless, planting seeds that grow until the soil of the heart is ready to receive the counterfeit. The very same desire that once enticed the daughters of men in Genesis is being cultivated today on glowing screens and printed pages, preparing minds to accept the forbidden. And while imagination prepares the way, practice seals it. Rituals spread across social media, spells dressed as games, invocations offered as harmless curiosity. People light candles, repeat chants, or whisper into mirrors, not realizing they are making proposals. In the unseen realm, such actions are invitations. The spirits are listening, waiting, eager to accept. Once the vow is made, even in ignorance, the counterfeit covenant takes root. And from there, the presence returns again and again, whispering, demanding, taking more until the person finds themselves in chains they never meant to wear. The stories pile higher as you listen. A young woman who cannot keep a relationship because every man she meets flees after nightmares of being attacked by something unseen. A man who dreams of a wedding night he never agreed to, waking with marks on his body. Couples who long for children but find themselves barren until prayer reveals the shadow of a jealous spirit clinging to one of them. Every culture has its names for these things, but the Bible's story of Genesis chapter 6 explains the root. The marriages of demons and humans were never myths, they were the opening of a wound that still bleeds through history. As the stories move closer to our own time, the language shifts but the themes do not. In the Middle Ages, priests wrote manuals warning of demons who disguised themselves as lovers. They described people confessing under tears, insisting that they were bound to a spirit who came to them night after night, whispering in their ear as if they were married. Some spoke of children born weak or strange, children they believed were touched by something beyond. To the Church, these were not just hallucinations, they were evidence of the same rebellion that began before the flood, still finding cracks to slip through centuries later. In parts of Africa and the Caribbean, spirit spouses are not whispered about in secret, they are spoken of openly, feared even today. Families believe a person's fortune or ruin can be tied to whether a river spirit or sea queen has claimed them. Weddings between mortals and spirits are said to take place in dreams or rituals, and the bond is considered unbreakable without strong spiritual intervention. Men are warned not to look too long into waters at night, and women are taught to avoid accepting gifts from strangers near rivers. The idea is not myth to them, but daily reality. And then there are the personal testimonies from the modern world, often dismissed by psychologists but eerily consistent. A woman who dreams of walking down an aisle only to see no human groom, just a shadow waiting at the altar. A man who wakes every night at the same hour, pinned down, unable to breathe, feeling the weight of a jealous partner he cannot see. Couples who suffer unexplained miscarriages or endless fights, only to later discover through prayer that an unseen bond is sabotaging their union. These stories may sound strange, but they are told in every language, from every continent, carrying the same warning: spirits seek covenant, and they do not let go easily. What makes all of this so unsettling is the deliberate way it mirrors true marriage. In Scripture, marriage is described as two becoming one flesh, a covenant that is not easily broken. Spirit spouses imitate this design, forging counterfeit covenants that bind body, mind, and soul. That is why they are so destructive, because they claim what only God has the right to claim. And once a person is bound, the spirit acts with the jealousy of a spouse, punishing betrayal, sabotaging rivals, demanding loyalty. It is not casual torment, it is marital possessiveness twisted into darkness. The inheritance of such unions lingers as well. Families plagued for generations by patterns they cannot explain, barrenness, sudden deaths, broken relationships, poverty that seems unnatural, often trace these curses back to unholy covenants. Somewhere in the past, a vow was made, an invitation accepted, and the bond has echoed down through bloodlines. This is why deliverance often requires renouncing not just personal but ancestral covenants, cutting ties with spirits that claim whole families as their own. And when the ties are cut, testimonies of freedom ripple outward, as if generations of chains finally snap at once. The way culture has prepared hearts for these things is subtle, almost invisible unless you step back to see the pattern. The obsession with forbidden romance is everywhere. Books and movies filled with stories of humans falling in love with beings not of this world, presented not as horrors but as fantasies worth longing for. Audiences cheer for relationships between mortals and vampires, angels and women, demons and men. What once would have been called corruption is now called entertainment, even romance. And the more people consume these stories, the more their desires are shaped toward the counterfeit. And it does not stop at fiction. Rituals flood social media feeds, disguised as harmless trends. Teenagers record themselves whispering to mirrors, lighting candles, asking spirits to appear. Some laugh when nothing happens, others feel something watching, and some admit that from that day forward, they no longer feel alone in their rooms. To them it seemed like a game, but in the unseen realm, it was a vow. The spirits need only the smallest invitation, the faintest yes, and they step in. What begins as curiosity becomes covenant, and the presence that answers is rarely willing to leave. The modern testimonies mirror the old too closely to dismiss. A woman in South America describing a presence that visits her bed, jealous of her husband, matches the confession of a monk in Europe 700 years ago. A fisherman in West Africa warning of a bride from the water mirrors stories told in Mesopotamia millennia earlier. And the Bible's record in Genesis reads like the foundation stone upon which all these fragments rest. When the sons of God took the daughters of men as wives, they set in motion a pattern that echoes endlessly, spirits crossing boundaries, seeking intimacy, and leaving ruin behind. But what unsettles even more is the persistence of hybrid imagery. Alien abductees speak of experiments, of offspring they are told belong to both them and their captors. Ancient myths speak of demigods, children of gods and mortals who towered above men. Genesis speaks of Nephilim, mighty men of renown, whose presence filled the earth with violence. Across every age, the same detail repeats. Unions that produce something other, something neither fully human nor fully spirit, and always, always, those beings carry destruction in their wake. Imagine living in a village overshadowed by such creatures. Imagine children towering above their parents by the age of 12, their appetites endless, their tempers deadly. Imagine leaders too strong to challenge, demanding worship, consuming resources, spreading terror. That was the world before the flood, and fragments of it survived long enough for Israel to face echoes of it in Canaan. The giants were not just tall men, they were living reminders of the corruption that began when heaven's rebels sought marriage with humanity. And though they fell before faith-filled warriors like Joshua and David, their shadow has never left the imagination of the world. And so we stand in an age where the stories continue, wrapped in new disguises. The fear remains the same, that unseen eyes watch in the night, that whispers offer intimacy no human ever should, that bonds are forged in dreams and rituals, and that the price of saying yes is chains that last a lifetime. The Bible spoke of it first, cultures across the world repeated it, and people even now feel the grip of it in their own lives. And as the patterns return, as the fascination with forbidden unions grows louder, the sense that we are walking once again into days like Noah's grows harder to ignore. The most disturbing element is how these unions are described by those who claim to experience them today. They rarely speak of random hauntings or passing nightmares. They describe relationships, ongoing and possessive. A woman says she feels watched when she changes her clothes, not by a stranger on the street but by someone who calls her, mine. A man confesses that whenever he tries to build a family, dreams of a jealous partner tear him apart at night, and in the morning his relationships collapse. These are not simply attacks, they are claims of ownership. And ownership, when spoken of in the language of the unseen, is always covenant. Those who study deliverance report the same behavior across countless testimonies. The spirits act like spouses. They arrive on anniversaries. They become angry when prayers are spoken. They retaliate when human partners are pursued. They demand loyalty in the most unsettling ways, and when confronted, they sometimes even speak through the person they possess, declaring, "He belongs to me," or "She is my wife." These chilling declarations reveal a mindset rooted not in casual torment but in counterfeit marriage. Think of how marriage functions in God's design. It is the merging of two lives, the forming of one bond, sealed with vows that are meant to last. Spirit spouses mimic this but twist it. The bond is formed through dreams, rituals, or whispered invitations. The vows are sealed not in love but in fear. And once the counterfeit covenant is in place, it becomes the lens through which the spirit interprets all the person's actions. To attend church is to betray them. To fall in love with a human is to cheat on them. To try to break free is to file for divorce, and they do not let go willingly. The Bible's warnings against idolatry take on new weight when seen through this lens. The prophets spoke of Israel as a bride who committed adultery with idols. God's jealousy was described not as a human flaw but as the pain of a faithful husband betrayed. Behind every idol stood a demon demanding loyalty, demanding marriage of the soul. Worship was covenant, and covenant was marriage. To bow before a false god was not only sin, it was entering into a counterfeit union. This is why God's anger burned so fiercely. His people were meant to belong to him, yet they gave themselves to others who claimed to be husbands but were only thieves. And the reach of these covenants extends further than most realize. Inheritance becomes poisoned. Families who unknowingly carry vows made by ancestors often struggle under invisible burdens. In some households, every generation sees marriages fail in the same pattern, or women miscarry in the same stage of pregnancy, or men die before reaching the same age. These are not coincidences, they are echoes of old covenants never broken. Somewhere, sometime, a vow was spoken, a spirit was invited, and it claimed not only one life but a family line. Unless renounced, the counterfeit marriage continues to echo through time. The enemy's obsession with covenant is not random. From Eden onward, God revealed his plan of redemption through promises, covenants, and ultimately the great marriage of Christ and his church. The fallen ones understood this and sought to corrupt it. If God would reveal his love through marriage, they would pervert marriage into a weapon. If God's covenant would give life, theirs would steal it. If God's bride would be holy, theirs would be bound in chains. Every counterfeit marriage is not just a theft of intimacy but a strike against God's eternal design. Modern fascination with spirits as lovers only makes the battlefield more dangerous. Social media platforms carry thousands of posts from people confessing relationships with spirits. Some boast of the comfort they receive, some claim to be protected by unseen lovers, some even say they married their spirits in rituals with rings and vows. To them it feels empowering, even romantic. But beneath the surface the same pattern emerges: isolation, jealousy, destruction. The counterfeit covenant cannot bless because it was never meant to bless. It can only drain, corrupt, and enslave. And as culture grows comfortable with these ideas, the ground is prepared for something larger. Jesus said the last days would mirror the days of Noah. If in Noah's day the central corruption was marriages between humans and fallen beings, then we should not be surprised when similar stories resurface before the end. Already people describe encounters not with angels but with strange beings they call extraterrestrials. Abduction narratives speak of experiments, of reproductive violations, of hybrid offspring spoken of as saviors or leaders of the future. Whether these accounts are true in the physical sense or not, spiritually they echo the exact same theme: beings from beyond seeking covenant with humanity, and promising greatness while delivering only fear. The whispers that once came in dreams now arrive through entertainment, through rituals, through strange encounters in the night sky. Yet the thread runs straight back to Genesis. The marriages of the sons of God and the daughters of men were the first counterfeit unions recorded in history, and every story since has been a shadow of that original rebellion. The Nephilim were the living fruit of those vows, and though the flood ended their reign, their memory has never left the human imagination. Their legacy lingers not only in scripture but in myth, legend, and the recurring terror of spirit spouses that stalk the living even now. Imagine how the world must have looked then. Imagine walking through valleys where shadows of giants stretched across the fields, where voices of conquerors shook the air, where families whispered about unions they could not speak aloud. Imagine living in fear that your daughter might be chosen by one of these beings, not chosen for honor but for corruption. Imagine knowing that the very image of humanity was being rewritten, day by day, until God's flood came crashing down. That same dread still echoes in the hearts of those who feel unseen eyes on them in the night, who hear whispers they cannot explain, who wake from dreams that feel like ceremonies they never agreed to. The pattern is alive, waiting, spreading quietly through every age. The further you trace these patterns, the more the boundaries of reality itself begin to feel thinner, as if what is happening is not just folklore or imagination but a cycle repeating beneath the surface of history. The women of Genesis saw beings who should have been unreachable descend into their lives with promises and power. The daughters of villages centuries later told nearly the same story, of strangers who were not strangers, of lovers who appeared in dreams or from the depths of rivers. And today, in countless testimonies scattered across forums, prayer groups, and whispered conversations, the details remain hauntingly familiar. One man describes going to bed with his wife but waking in the night to feel another presence beside him, one that pushed her away and clung to him. Another woman recounts years of waking exhausted, convinced she was battling something in her sleep, until finally a voice spoke clearly: "You are mine." A teenager, experimenting with rituals she found online, confesses that ever since she played what she thought was a harmless game, she feels a figure sitting on her bed every night, touching her hair as though it owned her. These stories do not end with fear alone. They end with broken homes, ruined relationships, illness, despair. The pattern holds: intimacy promised, covenant demanded, destruction delivered. And woven into these accounts are the signs of marriage behavior, not random haunting. The spirits show jealousy, punishing when attention shifts away. They appear dressed in finery, in dreams that resemble weddings, complete with rings, vows, even feasts. They act as if the human is their spouse, entitled to loyalty, enraged at betrayal. This is why so many describe their lives being sabotaged when they try to date or marry. The spirit sabotages the union, driving the human partner away, leaving the victim alone. The counterfeit marriage allows no rivals. The inheritance of these unions is perhaps the most terrifying element. Families trapped in endless cycles of pain often find that somewhere in their ancestry lies a covenant never renounced. In old villages, vows were made to river spirits for protection. In households, ancestors sought fertility or wealth through rituals that involved inviting spirits as partners. The descendants, unaware, inherit the weight. Generations of failed marriages, of sudden deaths, of uncanny misfortune follow like shadows. The counterfeit covenant does not loosen its grip with time. It burrows deeper, its chains passed down until someone chooses to break them. Deliverance ministers speak of these cases often. A young man unable to keep a job, plagued by nightmares, discovers in prayer that his grandmother dedicated him to a spirit as a child. A woman who suffers years of miscarriages finally finds freedom after renouncing a marriage made by an ancestor to a sea goddess. In every case, the pattern is the same. The covenant acts like a marriage contract, and only when it is annulled in the name of something stronger does freedom come. The moment the vow is broken, the oppression lifts, like chains snapping in an instant. This persistence across cultures and centuries reveals the same hunger that drove the sons of God in Genesis. The fallen beings did not simply lust after human beauty, they sought to corrupt the very inheritance of humanity. Their children, the Nephilim, were not just tall figures, they were weapons of corruption, living proof that the line of man could be tainted. And though the flood wiped them away, the hunger for covenant remained, passed down through the rebellion of demons who still seek to claim humans as their own. When Jesus warned that the last days would mirror the days of Noah, he was not painting a vague picture. He was pointing back to the corruption of covenant itself. The violence of that world was rooted in marriages that should never have existed, unions that defiled what God had made. If those days are to return, then the same hunger for covenant will rise again in new disguises. And already, we see it, not through giants roaming fields, but through whispered vows in dreams, through rituals disguised as entertainment, through myths reborn as science fiction. The form changes, but the desire does not. The fascination with aliens only sharpens the suspicion. People describe beings who appear radiant, who speak of peace, who promise knowledge, but who also perform experiments, collecting human seed, implanting strange offspring. These details mirror the oldest stories almost too closely. Whether physical or spiritual, the language echoes the same rebellion, outsiders seeking union, creating hybrids, rewriting humanity. Some abductees even speak of feeling bonded to these beings, unable to resist their presence, haunted by them long after encounters end. It is not difficult to see the shadow of Genesis chapter 6 in their words. Entertainment too feeds the fire. Teenagers read stories of falling in love with demons who secretly protect them, women dream of angels who defy heaven for their affection, men imagine vampire brides who will make them immortal. These are not isolated fantasies. They shape desires. They teach a generation to long for intimacy with what is forbidden, to see danger as romance, to welcome counterfeit vows as thrilling. What was once unthinkable becomes desirable, and the trap is set long before the spirit ever arrives to whisper in the dark. And while some scoff at the thought, others know the weight firsthand. A woman in Eastern Europe confesses that every night she feels herself being held by arms she cannot see, arms that grow violent if she resists. A man in South America admits that he has never been able to marry, because whenever he becomes close to a woman, she dreams of being attacked by something she cannot fight. Families across Africa still treat spirit spouses as part of daily life, building rituals to appease them, even conducting divorces to free their children. The persistence of these accounts across centuries, across continents, is too striking to be ignored. The thread runs back, always, to the same origin. When the sons of God took daughters of men as wives, they set a pattern of counterfeit covenant that never stopped echoing. Their marriages were not erased by water, their hunger not quenched by judgment. The rebellion continues in whispers, in shadows, in rituals, in dreams. And humanity, often unknowing, continues to answer the invitation, stepping into vows that promise everything but only ever steal. If you step back and see the larger picture, what emerges is not just a series of scattered stories, but a consistent strategy, a deliberate pursuit that began in the earliest chapters of Scripture and winds through history like a hidden river. The sons of God crossing into human lives was not an isolated rebellion, it was a template, a pattern the enemy has never abandoned. In every culture, in every age, he finds new disguises, new languages, new ways to whisper the same old vows. Always the same hunger, always the same outcome, covenant that does not bless but binds, intimacy that does not give life but drains it. The dreams people recount are striking in their detail. Ceremonies held in strange halls, rings placed on fingers, feasts with guests they cannot recognize, all unfolding while the person sleeps. When they wake, they feel different, claimed, watched, never alone again. Some even report physical marks on their bodies, scratches, bruises, impressions on their skin where no human hand touched them. The wedding they never agreed to lingers in their waking life, shaping every decision, shadowing every joy. It is as if a counterfeit altar has been built in the unseen, and from it the spirit declares its rights. Deliverance cases often describe the moment of confrontation with chilling clarity. A minister prays, demanding the spirit leave, and suddenly a voice speaks through the person, not in their tone but in something older, harsher. "She is mine," it growls. "We are married. He belongs to me." The insistence is not random. It is covenant language, legal language, as if the demon believes it has a contract that cannot be broken. And only when the person renounces, only when they declare with their own lips that they reject the counterfeit union, does the contract shatter. The blood of Christ cancels the vow, and the presence that once seemed immovable flees in an instant. But the fight is rarely easy, because the spirits cling like jealous spouses. They retaliate when threatened, stirring nightmares, causing sickness, whispering fear. They act not like intruders but like partners who refuse to be left. This is why so many describe their oppression not as haunting but as marriage. They are not visited randomly, they are pursued relentlessly, as if the covenant must be honored no matter the cost. And the more the person resists, the more violently the spirit reacts, until the true bridegroom's name is spoken with faith, and the counterfeit marriage crumbles under the weight of something greater. The obsession with inheritance still runs through all of this. People speak of their children having the same dreams they once had, of their daughters being visited by the same presence, of their sons struggling with the same sabotage. It is as if the vows echo down bloodlines, passed like a poisoned gift from one generation to the next. And in many cases, when deliverance finally comes, it is not only one person who finds freedom but entire families who feel the release. Chains that wrapped around ancestors and descendants alike break at once, leaving a legacy finally cleansed of its counterfeit covenant. This is what makes the warnings of Scripture feel sharper than ever. When Jesus said the last days would be as the days of Noah, he was not speaking only of violence or corruption in general. He was pointing to the blurring of boundaries, the corruption of covenant, the same marriages that once nearly erased humanity itself. If the end of the age will mirror the beginning, then these counterfeit unions are not relics of ancient days, they are harbingers of what is yet to come. The fascination with spirits as lovers, the myths of hybrids, the stories of strange offspring, they are not random obsessions. They are the preparation of a world walking once again into a Noah-like age. Even the symbols of modern culture reflect this hunger. Television series portray demons as misunderstood lovers, angels as rebels who fall for human women, monsters as romantic heroes. The storylines dress corruption in beauty, planting seeds of sympathy, bending desires toward what was once feared. Children grow up cheering for forbidden unions, their imaginations trained to long for them, their hearts softened to the counterfeit before it even arrives in reality. What begins as fiction can easily become fantasy, and what becomes fantasy soon opens doors for invitation. At the same time, abduction narratives grow louder, told by people who insist they did not imagine their encounters. They describe rooms filled with light, beings who speak without words, experiments with seed and womb, promises of children not entirely human. Whether physical or spiritual, the echoes are undeniable. Once again, unions between human and other. Once again, whispers of hybrid offspring. Once again, vows forced in the night, leaving people altered forever. The world may call them aliens, but the Bible's story casts a longer, darker shadow across these accounts. And for those caught in these covenants, life becomes a battlefield. Some resign themselves, believing the presence that claims them is a blessing, even a gift. They embrace their spirit spouse, convinced it protects them or gives them strength. But others fight, seeking freedom, desperate to break bonds they never wanted. They speak of nights filled with terror, of unseen hands choking them when they pray, of jealous whispers when they try to love another human being. Their stories are raw, desperate, marked by the same pattern that began in Genesis: vows that should never have been spoken, bonds that should never have existed, chains that only something greater can break. And through it all, the question that began in whispers thousands of years ago continues to echo: what happens when demons desire covenant with flesh? The daughters of men once looked into the faces of beings who were never meant to descend, and they said yes. That yes still reverberates, finding new voices in every age, shaping myths, legends, testimonies, even modern obsessions. The flood washed the earth but not the hunger. The corruption was judged but not extinguished. And as each century adds its stories, as each generation whispers of spirits who demand more than fear, the sense grows that what began in Noah's day is not finished. It waits, disguised, patient, persistent, still pressing its vows into human lives. The weight of these stories builds like a storm on the horizon, each account a drop of rain until the sky itself feels heavy with the same warning. From Genesis to today, the pattern has never changed. Spirits long for covenant, for vows that bind, for marriages that are not marriages but chains disguised as love. They do not appear with terror at first, they appear with allure. They promise gifts, intimacy, secrets, power. They offer what lonely hearts crave most. And once the yes is spoken, whether in ritual, in dream, or in whispered desire, the vow is sealed, and the spirit claims its bride or groom. The earth before the flood drowned beneath this corruption, humanity nearly erased under the weight of unions that should never have existed. And though judgment swept it away, the hunger of the fallen never died. They lingered in Canaan's giants, in the myths of gods and demigods, in the whispered legends of fox spirits, water brides, incubus lovers. They disguised themselves as protectors, as companions, as gods, but the outcome was always the same: destruction following devotion, curses following vows. Even now, the stories refuse to fade. People speak of waking with rings on their fingers that vanish by morning. They speak of unseen partners whispering words of affection but growling in rage when they seek freedom. They speak of children who inherit the same oppression, nightmares that run through generations like bloodlines. Deliverance ministers confront spirits that shout, "We are married," as if they hold contracts written in invisible ink. The desperation in these accounts is not the cry of haunted people, it is the cry of people trapped in marriages they never chose. And yet, woven through the terror is something greater. The counterfeit cannot exist without the original. Demonic marriages only mimic because true marriage is holy, designed by God as a reflection of His own love. The enemy twists what he cannot create. He forges contracts because he cannot form covenant. He demands loyalty because he cannot inspire devotion. And this is why, even at their fiercest, the counterfeit unions collapse when confronted by the true. Where the name of Christ is spoken in faith, the counterfeit vows burn away. Where His blood is claimed, the contracts dissolve. Where His covenant is embraced, the counterfeit is powerless. This is what makes the final vision of Scripture so powerful. Revelation does not end with giants or counterfeit unions. It ends with a wedding. The marriage supper of the Lamb, where Christ takes his bride, the church, into eternal covenant. Every counterfeit spirit spouse, every false vow, every demonic marriage is exposed as a pale imitation in that moment. The true bridegroom claims his people, not with fear but with love, not with chains but with freedom, not with whispers in the dark but with a voice like many waters that calls his bride into joy unending. And this is the answer hidden all along. Can demons marry humans? They can mimic, they can counterfeit, they can bind with false vows, and they have done so from the days of Noah to this very hour. Their unions have left giants in the land, curses in bloodlines, and shadows across history. But their marriages are not marriages at all. They are prisons dressed as romance, chains forged to look like rings. They are not true covenant because only God can make covenant, and his covenant breaks every counterfeit. The days of Noah remind us what happens when humanity says yes to forbidden vows. The flood reminds us what God will do to protect his creation from being consumed by corruption. The cross reminds us that every chain, every counterfeit, every false contract can be broken by a greater love. And the empty tomb reminds us that no power of darkness, no demonic claim, no counterfeit marriage can withstand the life that bursts from the grave. The stories we hear today, of spirit spouses, of abductions, of lovers who are not human, are not myths without meaning. They are reminders that the old hunger still lingers, that the days of Noah are not just behind us but ahead of us. And when Jesus said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man," he was warning us to watch, to discern, to guard our hearts against the counterfeit unions that still whisper in the dark. Because the choice is not simply whether demons can marry humans, but whether we will allow ourselves to be claimed by them. Every person must choose their covenant. To say yes to the whispers of spirits is to bind yourself to death disguised as love. To say yes to the bridegroom who gave his life for you is to enter into a marriage that never ends, into love that casts out fear, into covenant that brings life. And when the final wedding begins, when the heavens open and the voice calls out, "Blessed are those invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb," every counterfeit will be silenced. Every false spouse will vanish. Every curse will be broken. And the true marriage, the one humanity was always meant for, will begin without end. So the next time you hear the whisper, the next time the shadows press close, the next time a presence promises you what you think you desire, remember this truth. Their vows are lies, their promises are chains, their love is a mask. Only one bridegroom is faithful. Only one covenant gives life. Only one marriage will last forever. And that is the marriage no demon can counterfeit, no spirit can steal, no darkness can undo. The bridegroom waits, his invitation stands, and his love is stronger than every false vow that ever haunted the world.